And we was all sitting around, and after a while he come over and sit down to me. And lo, I hadn't even thought of such thing as going to him then. But he asked me, fidgeting around, if he could take me home that night. And gosh, he was right there within 200 or 300 yards of his house. And he went clear across Kelton, up miles up there to go take me home. So I figured he must have been pretty serious from the start. We got to going together then, and I guess we went together for about a year, pretty close to it, somewhere along there. Then he popped the question. And I was one of them kind of like, who was that talking here a while back about the other day at that funeral when they was talking about Larry Craig, when I insisted on him asking my daddy for my hand, you know. And he didn't much want to. It's kind of embarrassing to him. But anyhow, we set a date for him to come up there. And when he got there that night, well, he says, well, get your dad in here. So I went out and told Papa, come on in. And when he come in, well, Carl was sitting at a little old, we called them center tables, you know. I had my rouge sitting there on it. And he took that rouge into his hand and he turned that thing over so many times it broke my rouge all to pieces. While he was trying to ask Papa for my hand. And I remember him finally, he says, well, Brother Hamberlin, you know why I'm up here. Says, I come to ask you for Julie's hand in marriage. Papa says, well, says she's almost of marriageable age. Says, I guess it'll be all right. And then he said, well, I want Sister Hamberlin in here, want her consent too. So I went out and told Mama to come on in, that Carl wanted to ask her. And she come in and she says, well, Carl, I guess I'll give my consent, but says I don't have a daughter to give away. You know, he was wanting them to give it to her. But anyhow, they did give their consent, and we was married the first day of May, 1924. And we had, it was about a year and a half, and we had a baby. That was Wendell. Oh, we thought that was the grandest thing in this world. Of course, I had my first 3 children at home. I had the doctor out there, you know. Well, I had a doctor with the first, and no Dr. Ellis. And, oh, I had a kind of a time with Wendell. And I took sick one Sunday morning earlier, and it was about 1 o'clock on Sunday night before he was ever born. Anyhow, we thought that baby was the grandest thing there ever was, and we thought that much of him when he died, too. But then in 4 years, we had another baby. That was Nolan. And poor little old thing, he was such a long, skinny thing all of his life. He didn't look like a baby much. He looked more like a beanstalk. And he's still a beanstalk, but he's a pretty good-looking old boy now. And then we had our 3rd baby, Lawrence. The poor little old fella, I thought I never would give birth to him. We had a midwife with him. Well, we had a midwife with Nolan over at Granny Cummings. And she come over there the night that he was born. Well, I was took sick, you know, and Carl had to get out and ride the old mare over in Kelsey to get Sister Cummings to come over there to deliver that baby. And it was such a stormy night. Oh, it was storming that night, and we had a storm cellar. And she spent most of the time in that storm cellar and me laying in the bed in the house. But anyhow, he was born and everything went all fine. And then Lawrence, he come along. He was over here at where Hazel and them lived, you know, that's where he was born. And Nolan was born over in Summerfield. He should have been black, I guess. It wasn't. Anyhow, when Lawrence came along, blamed if he didn't mind your be black. That was the darkest little old baby I ever seen, and I called him a little darky for a long time. But he was just a dark skin. Of course, Carl had some folks that was dark skinned like that. And I thought I never would give birth to the poor little old feller. He was in a terrible bruised up shape. But he finally made it all right. Then I went for 11 years then before I had another baby. I had Carl Allen, that's one that's in Chicago. And then in 2 years, well, here come another one. That's Philip. In 2.5 years, well, here come another one. All boys. We never had any girls. I'm just as proud of my boys, those. You better shut that thing off now. I can't about run out of lies to tell, I guess.
They're all good-looking boys. I got some pictures over here. I'll take of them.
This is the place where we lived after we came back from Utah. We took a wild trip out there and stayed a few months and come right back to Kelsey. But this was taken after we moved over in the old Davis house on the west side of Kelsey community. And this is Wendell, Nolan, and Lawrence with Carl and myself while we were living there. This is a picture of Wendell before he got his hand shot off in a hunting accident. And they had a pet calf, and they were always tending to it, and he's feeding it on the bottle here in this picture.
This is the Davis house.
And this is the Davis house where we lived at that time. This is a picture of my 6 boys, my 2 families, after the day before Lawrence, the 3rd boy, was going into the service. And we sure wanted a picture of all of them together because we didn't know whether he'd come back or not. And at that time, my kids, the little kids, was taking the measles, and Philip was running a hot fever the day that that picture was made. But we got him out of bed and took him out so we'd have all 6 of the boys together before they were separated. And this is a picture of the boys, all 6 of the boys, at a family reunion we had here at our home. And we struggled with Maston that day to try to get him into the picture so we'd have all 6 of them, but we like not got him on it. That's all there is to say about that. Just the same picture, you know, me and Carl was on it. This is a picture of a family reunion we held here at our house about 20 years ago. And we've had quite an increase in our family since then. That's even before Amanda was born, and she's 20 years old now. That's about all. This is a picture of our family reunion again, and I was always taking the pictures, so I wasn't on any of these. This was taken also about 20 years ago. I want to tell you about our wedding now. This is a picture of Carl and myself and Cornelia and Moroni. We had a double wedding. To tell you about how it all came about to be a double wedding, Carl and I had decided to get married, and Cornelia and Moroni had set a different date. And Moroni came to me and says, "Sis, if you'll just wait a few days or a week or so, whatever it was," he says, "we'll have a double wedding out of it." He says, "I'll have to wait a certain length of time on Cornelia to get ready." And I talked to Carl, and he said it's all right, we'd wait. So that's how come us to have a double wedding out of it. Moroni wanted us to be married at the same time. So we were married in my father's home, and Brother George F. Green performed the wedding ceremony. That's Cornelia's granddaddy. My mother fixed supper, a wedding supper, for the whole business that night, and there was at least 35 or 40 people there, and she cooked and fixed a big meal for everybody that came to the wedding that night. Carl and I spent the first night at home, in my father's home, and Cornelia and Morona and I went to her mother's home and to spend the night. And the next morning, Carl and I got up. We went to the breakfast table, and Papa called on him to say the blessing. And Carl had acted like he had never said the blessing in his life, and it embarrassed him. But I never will forget that blessing he offered on the food that morning. It was a quick and a short one, I'll guarantee you. But that's about all I can tell you about the wedding. Well, we began to move that day, and we moved over into the old McGinty house in Kelsey. And Carl's grandparents, brother and sister Church, let us have 2 rooms of their house. It was a big house, and they let us have 2 rooms of the house to live in. And we used one for a living and a bedroom, and we used the other one for the kitchen. And we had very scant furniture to begin with in our married life. And it wasn't the very best of anything, but we were happy to be together, and that's about all I can tell you about the wedding, I guess.
Oh, that's not the church.
This is a picture of Carl and I just a short while after we were married, and I had on a new dress, and new dresses was hard to come by in those days too, believe me. That's about all you've seen it. This is a picture of Carl and I. We were typical farmers when that picture was made. Just as quick as we got our 2 rooms over in the McGinty house straightened up, we had to go to the field. Carl went to the field, and I went with him, went right along with him. And we had to chop and hoe cotton and everything else, just like we been married 40 years instead of just barely married. I went right along the field with every one of them to work. That's about it. This is Carl's grandfather and grandmother Church, Sister Bryant, his mother's parents. They are the people that let us live in the 2 rooms of their house when we were first married. And when we married, we had the various poorest kind of furniture that anybody could have. And I wonder a lot of times if young folks this day and time would get married on what we had. My husband had $7 in his pocket when we got married, and he went over to Josh Alt's store and bought us some groceries to start housekeeping on. We had a mattress made with 2 sheets sewn together and stuffed full of good soft grass that we gathered to make us a mattress to sleep on. He'd bought a stove, had a table, and we had a table with a mirror on it for a dresser. And that's how we started housekeeping. We don't have much better today. That's about the end of it. Oh, I can tell one thing more about right after we was married, about the missionaries coming in and eating with us. Just shortly after we were married, a few nights, there was a gang of the young folks in Kelsey that came over and gave us a big shivaree. And they played music and sang songs, and we started to go hide in the barn so they couldn't find us, but we decided we'd better get it over with, because if we did, we'd have to do it later. Didn't. But a few days, not too long after we were married, Carl and I both knew a lot of the missionaries that was in here. And some of them came home from a ball game one day with Carl and was going to stay for supper with us. Well, I was being young and inexperienced. I wasn't too much of a cook, but I cooked and fixed what I had right quick. And Carl's grandmother brought in a pan of the most delicious biscuits that she had baked and fixed that you could ever sock your teeth into. And the elders sure did brag on the biscuits and things that we had, and I had to admit to them that I didn't cook them, and that liked to kill me. That's about all I had to say about it. This is a picture of Carl and I and our first baby, Wendell. we had moved away from the old McGinty house, or from where his grandparents lived, and had moved over on J.D. Bailey's place, his farm that he had for rent, and we stayed there for several years. I'll take that all back. We lived there just a very short while, made a crop or two, and then we moved over into what was called Summerfield. But this is our first baby, and he was born over there in that house where we lived on Brother J.D. Bailey's farm. Dr. Reynolds was the doctor that delivered Wendell, and he was born at home. He was a fat, chunky baby and plenty healthy all of his life. All right. We moved over in this place, this particular house. It was called the old Ben Sanders house at that time. And Heckley bought it from a Mr. Pt2, and he had a dairy out here later. And he and I had the dairy out here, and Myrtle Walters worked for him in the dairy for a long time. Then after that, we moved to Utah for a while. We sold out what we had and moved to Utah and worked out there for my older brother in his potato chip factory. But Lawrence took the rheumatic fever, and we had to come, or we thought we did at least, come back home again. And when we came back home, he later decided to buy this place. So he bought it, and he gave $2,000 for it. Imagine buying a farm, a house with 44 acres of land for $2,000. But anyhow, we've lived here the rest of our lives, and I guess this is where we'll live till we're buried, or I will. This particular house that we're living in now, Carl tore down the old Ben Sanders house and rebuilt this house from the foundation up. It had a good foundation. He dug holes, filled them full of rocks, and had a cement mixer to come out here and pour cement all down in there and put great big thick sills all the way around it, and had cement foundation in under the house. And if a storm ever comes that wants to blow this off the foundation, I don't want to be in it. Well, that's about all I know about it. While he was rebuilding this house, or tore the other one down and built this one, we were living in Heckley's old milk barn out there where he had his dairy. And we lived there until he got the house almost completed, and it turned cold, and I was pregnant with Masson. So I had to go to the hospital and had him, and when we come back out here, well, he moved me back into the house. But it still wasn't completed, and it wasn't a real warm place to bring a new baby. But we did manage. We lived in it and was quite comfortable till he could get it completed. Now, if you don't think that was some living, we'll try it sometime. When we left the J.D. Bailey farm, when Wendell was a baby, we moved over into Summerfield, into a house that Brother Bryant and his kids had inherited from an uncle of theirs. And we moved into a old box-framed house. And that winter, after Nolan was born, was one of the coldest winters we ever had in our lives. It went to 4 below zero, and we were living in that old box house, and nothing to heat by but an old fireplace that wouldn't throw out enough heat for anything. And the little old kitchen stove wasn't as big as anything, and that was all the heat we had in that house. It was so miserably cold that winter that Carl and Wendell would sleep at the foot of the bed, and the new baby and I would sleep at the head. To try to keep warm, we moved it all in by the fireplace and kept a fire going all night to try to keep from freezing to death. And that winter we like lost Nolan, and we never did get to take him to the doctor. The weather was so bad. But we figured that he had pneumonia, and he come very near dying. And how Carl's parents came over there one evening to visit, and that baby was in such a shape, Grandpa Bryant says, "Let's get up and go home. I can't stand it." He was just about dead. He'd coughed till he'd just turned blue. And we come very near losing him. And that was a terrible winter. The snow was on the ground 14 inches deep and freezing. Oh, gee, it was a terrible winter.
Did you tell how the walls were put together after you turned this
The
on?
old framed house that we lived in was 6-inch planks put up as walls, and on the outside was a little strip about 3 or 4 inches wide to cover up the cracks. And that was the kind of a house we were living in. And it came a storm while we was living over there one time, and it blew the washstand and the corner posts off the porch, and the water blew up through the ceiling and down into the floors of the house so bad that we'd have to keep sweeping it out.
Was this a single wall house?
That was a single walled house.
And no paper or anything on it?
Nothing. We nearly froze to death. But thank the Lord we're still alive. This is a picture of the house that J.D. Bailey and his wife lived in, and we lived on their rent farm east of there. But this is the house that was located right across from where Scott Green's did live for a while. Not right across from his new house, but down below where Leon and Ada lived. It was a house right across the road from them. Later, Addie Mae and James Alt moved into it, and that was Scott's uncle. And the J.D. Bailey family, him and his wife, they moved to Utah to live out there where their son was. They're both dead and gone now, but that's where they're buried, is in Utah.
Is this a magnolia tree in the picture?
And this was a beautiful you want that on there?
Uh-huh.
This tree that's in their front yard was one of the most beautiful magnolia trees I ever seen. It was always loaded with beautiful white blooms while they were living there.
Mm-hmm.
This is a picture of our double wedding picture we had made on our 50th wedding anniversary. Carl and myself and Cornelia and Moroni. Moroni and Cornelia, my brother and his wife, the ones we were married, had a double wedding. This is Carl and myself taken on our 50th wedding anniversary. This is a picture of Carl Bryant, my husband, when he was a baby, and his sister Leah Bryant when they was little kids. This is a picture of Carl's parents, Robert Ernest Bryant and his mother, Naomi Church Bryant. It's told that part, that that's a picture of Carl's parents and Sister Bryant, his mother, once found they were members of the church, and she found $1, a gold dollar or a silver dollar or something, and she set off and got the church news, and that's how they learned of the Kelsey community, and that's how come them to move here, because it was a Mormon community they wanted to move into.
Where were they living at the time?
Well, the only place I ever knew of them living anywhere was over there where their home was.
But where did they move from?
Gosh, I don't know where they were.
When she
at that
found the
time.
silver
It was in
dollar.
Tennessee, wasn't it? I think they were in Tennessee when she found that, because that was where a lot of that, about that B.H. Roberts and all of that went on. And they were living in I don't know what part of Tennessee or anything, but that's where they were living.
Now, what about her parents? Were they members of the church?
Yes.
And when did they come here?
Well, I don't know when they came here or anything. See, I didn't know them for a long time, but they lived over there in that McGinty house. This is a picture of my husband, Carl Bryant. He's in the center, and Heber Jones and Johnny Futrell. And I think it was taken along about the time that they were in the mutual presidency in our mutual organization that we had every Sunday night at this time. There's one thing more I would like to tell about that I've forgotten about, and that was my baptism. My father was away from home at that time of working, and I wanted to be baptized by him. But my mother asked me what was my second choice, and I told her at that time it was our branch president, Leroy Marsh. He baptized me, and the next day after that they were having some kind of a celebration up at Brother Leroy Marsh's house. I was baptized in his swimming pool, and they were having a celebration of some kind at his house, and they were going to confirm me a member of the church at that time. And Brother Luther K. Bailey was one of the counselors in the presidency, and he was the one that confirmed me a member of the church. That's all I can tell you about that. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a picture of my father and mother. My father, it was in his later years, but a picture was taken off of another picture when my mother was younger and put it on the picture with my father so that they would be together. My mother's name was Effie Lavinia Irwin, and this is a picture of her mother, Sarah Irwin, a grandmother that I never knew. But we loved her so much because my mother looked so much like her. What are you trying to do?
Try and turn it off.
The light turns on at the door over there, Fabian.
That's good.
Now you ready? You ready?
Uh-huh.
I want to tell you one more or two more things before I close. My son, Wendell, died July the 13th, one day after my 65th birthday, 1973. He died in Carrollton, Texas, at the age of 47, but he's buried down here on my lot at the Kelsey Cemetery. That's his own request that he wanted to be buried on Mother's lot. Carl died July the 22nd, 1989, in the Gilmer Medical Center Hospital. And it's been a lonely old time since he passed away. I was born July the 12th, 1907, and I believe this has been the loneliest time that I've ever spent in my life. As I stated in the start, I am now 82 years old, and Maston and I live at home together. But our son Philip sees after us, and we feel that we've been blessed to have as long a life as we have. And we're so thankful to our Heavenly Father for the privilege we've had of this life together. That's all. Wendell lost his hand in a hunting accident, and it's shot off about halfway between his wrist and his elbow. But he lived a good life after that and could carry on his work just the same. It never did make any difference about his hand being gone. He didn't let it get him down. He had a good attitude about everything and carried on and had a good life. His hand is buried at the west side of my mother's tombstone down in the Kelsey Cemetery. And at this time, what your last name is?
Carol Anderson.
Carol Anderson and Fayreen Bonebreak are going down there to take pictures of the tombstones now.
Victor Carl Hamberlin. This is Julia's mother. Julia's little brother. This is Julia's grandparents, James David Hamberlin and Julia Helen Irwin Hamberlin, Carl's parents. Her father, Carl's parents. Carl. Carl Bryant's grave, Julia's husband. This is Julia's son, Wendell Theron Bryant, born October the 19th, 1925, died July the 13th, 1973.
Is that a 3?
Son that lost his hand in the shooting accident. This is Carl Bryant's father, Robert E. Bryant. Naomi Church Bryant.